Hi, everyone. My name is Sabrina Damast. I'm an immigration attorney in Los Angeles, California. We are on day 4 of the second Trump administration, and I thought this would be a good time to talk about some of the executive orders related to immigration that President Trump has signed, and some of the regulation notices that have been posted as well in the Federal Register. So, I'm going to start with one that was posted yesterday in draft form that is meant to go into effect tomorrow, and that is a Federal Register notice about expedited removal orders. Expedited removal orders are a type of deportation order that an immigration official can issue without allowing somebody to go before an immigration judge and request various types of defenses from being removed. So it's these orders are typically aimed at people who have been in the United States for a minimal amount of time. Now, previously, the people who were issued expedited removal orders were typically those that were found within 100 miles of a port of entry, and who could not show that they had been in the United States for at least 14 days. That definition is being greatly expanded by the Trump administration with this notice. They are now going to expand the definition of those who can be issued an expedited removal order to any person who basically entered without inspection or without proper documentation, who was not admitted or paroled into the U.S., and who cannot show to the immigration officer that they have been physically present in the United States continuously for the last 2 years immediately preceding the date that this determination is being made. So that's really important. It changes two major things. One, they're not limiting it anymore to the 100-mile radius from a port of entry. And two, it's no longer whether or not you've been in the country for at least 14 days. Now it's 2 years. What can you do about this? Well, I think the most practical thing people might want to do is try to put together documentation that shows they have been in the country for at least 2 years, the last 2 years prior to whatever date you're talking about. So that might be pay stubs, rent receipts, doctor's records. For children, it might be school records. Anything that places the person here in the United States for at least 2 years prior to the date that you're talking about, right? Which is whatever date they're encountered by an immigration official. Now, again, this only applies to folks that were not admitted or paroled into the US. So if you entered on a tourist visa or student visa, you were admitted at a port of entry, not an issue. If you presented at a port of entry and you were given a parole document, not an issue. But if you don't have proof that you were admitted or paroled, you should be thinking about putting together proof that you've been physically in the United States continuously for at least 2 years, or really more than 2 years, because the more you can show, the more likely it is that those 2 years have been met. Okay, now I want to talk about one of the executive orders that was signed on the very first day of President Trump's uh, administration, and it's the one that seeks to rewrite birthright citizenship, right? It's called Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship. So, as I think most people are aware, the majority of individuals born in the United States are considered U.S. citizens, right? It doesn't matter whether their parents had lawful status or no status in the U.S. The only exception to that rule historically has been the children of certain diplomats to the United States. So, if you were born here, but your parent was a diplomat from another country serving a diplomatic term, you may not have qualified for birthright citizenship. But basically, everybody else born in the US was a US citizen, regardless of their parent status. This executive order uh, purports to reinterpret that definition, which comes from the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. And it basically says that an individual born in the United States will not be considered a U.S. citizen if their mother was unlawfully present in the U.S. and their father was not a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident, um, or their mother was in the U.S. on a temporary visa, such as a tourist visa or a work visa or a student visa, and the father was not a United States citizen or a lawful permanent resident at the time of the birth. That's like some major groups of people, right? Because we're not talking anymore just about kids born to undocumented immigrants. We're talking about kids born to parents, who are here on an H-1B, right? Parents who are here as students, right? People who are here lawfully but temporarily. This is, to say the least, an absolutely extreme interpretation of the 14th Amendment, and one that I don't think really has any credibility in any sort of historical legal analysis. The good news that I can give you about this, well, there was two things. First of all, it was not meant to take effect for at least 30 days from the date it was signed, and it only was going to apply to children born, in that 30-day period, the post 30-day period from when it was signed. So nobody born in the US already was affected by this. Nobody that was going to be born in the 30 days that followed was going to be affected by this. But the other really good news, I think, is that today a district court in Washington issued a temporary injunction against this executive order. Um, that is a temporary order, but basically the court found that the plaintiffs in that lawsuit had shown a sufficient likelihood that this executive order was completely illegal and unconstitutional, that they were going to pause it from going into effect until there could be further litigation on the full legal um the full legality of it. So basically, until there's a trial on whether or not this is in fact legal, the judge believes there's a sufficiently strong possibility that it's not legal, that he's preventing it from going into effect. So that is a good news, and that is an update literally from the last hour, today on the 23rd in a district court in Washington. So I think for now, nobody really needs to worry about that. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll see if anything changes. But that's where we stand on birthright citizenship. For now, everybody born in the US continues to be a US citizen, with that exception maybe of certain children of diplomats. Now, the last thing I wanted to just sort of touch on is there were a series of executive orders about the border. This was no surprise, I think, to anybody who was around during the first Trump administration, or anybody who's been listening to what, President Trump has said he wants to do. Um, he believes that the border is basically the site of an invasion of immigrants into the United States. His words, not mine. And the word invasion is, in fact, in one of these executive orders. So they are declaring a national emergency. I think their intention is to be able to use military resources at the border to possibly prevent people from entering, from building a wall. Um, they will likely, I think, reinstitute the Remain in Mexico policy, where asylum seekers have to remain in Mexico while their asylum claims are heard in the United States. That, for anybody who remembers, was an absolute travesty of a policy. It resulted in countless thousands of people being kidnapped, being assaulted, not being brought by U.S. immigration authorities to their hearings in the U.S., and then being ordered deported for failing to appear when, in fact, they had no ability to appear unless the immigration officers at the border transported them like they were supposed to. It's going to be nightmare. It's going to be chaos. It's going to result in a lot of harm to people who are trying to access the protections that our law allows them to apply for. Kind of keeping with that notion, they have already shut down the CBP One app. That was a phone app that people in Mexico could use once they arrived, in a certain distance from the border, to schedule an appointment to present themselves at a port of entry, make any claim that they might have for asylum, and be processed to lawfully enter the country pending a determination on their status. That system was taken offline on Monday, and all scheduled appointments were already canceled. So CBP One is no more. Uh, the executive orders also touch on some things like forcing registration of non-citizens over a certain age. We don't have a lot of details yet about how that's going to play out, but it's definitely something we're going to keep an eye on. Uh, it directs the federal government to provide more resources for criminal prosecutions of people who enter the country unlawfully, and or enter the country unlawfully after being already deported once. Um, the last thing it does that I find particularly interesting is it seems to be declaring all of the cartels in Mexico to be um, quasi-government actors, right? And declares cartels and transnational gangs to be terrorist organizations, or at least it seems to be directing the federal government perhaps to provide more guidance that will in the end result in those terrorism designations. I find the language about the cartels acting as quasi-government entities to be really interesting as an immigration lawyer because when we represent people in asylum cases and the people that our clients fear are cartels and gangs and not the elected officials of their government, we often get a lot of pushback from the Department of Homeland Security saying that one of the requirements for asylum is that the person fear harm from either a government official or a private actor that the government is unable or unwilling to control. The fact that the US president is now describing Mexican cartels as or quasi-governmental entities, I think is actually a very powerful statement for people seeking asylum based on harm from cartels in Mexico. I think that gives them a lot of good legal arguments to present to a judge that, in fact, their persecutors are, in fact, essentially members of the government. Whether they were duly elected or not, they are functioning as government officials. Now, whether or not immigration judges and asylum officers will find that line of argumentation persuasive, yet to be seen. But I certainly think a lot of immigration lawyers, myself included, will start using that quote when they are representing people seeking asylum because of cartel-related violence. I will keep monitoring these executive orders. We'll see how these things start to shape up. I will try to provide updated videos as often as I can. Of course, I welcome folks in the public who want a consultation about their individual circumstances and whether they qualify for any type of immigration status to call our office and schedule a consultation with one of the attorneys. We have 3 fabulous immigration attorneys in our office that can meet with people and try to help them understand their individual circumstances. The number for our office is 323-475-8716. Again, 323-475-8716. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.